No one expected that behind dry reports and quiet laboratories, hidden within the ruins of the Third Reich, something was forming that could have changed the course of human history. When, in 1938, German physicists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann accidentally discovered nuclear fission in uranium, none of them could have believed that this finding would bring the world to the brink of a new and terrifying era. At that time, it was seen merely as another step in theoretical physics proof that the atom was not indivisible. Yet, within months, this knowledge had become the foundation for a potential weapon unlike anything before. Late 1930 seconds, Germany was a nation consumed by technological and scientific progress. Laboratories, universities, and research institutes operated under the ideology of national strength. When it became clear that atomic fission released immense energy, the interest quickly expanded beyond academia. Military officials took notice. In Berlin, a secret research initiative was formed, the so-called Uranium Club. Its goal was simple in theory but monumental in practice: to determine whether atomic energy could be harnessed to create a new kind of bomb. The idea was not about peaceful reactors, but about a weapon capable of rewriting the rules of war. The project's leadership included some of the greatest scientific minds of the era: Werner Heisenberg, Karl Wirtz, Kurt Diebner, and others. They faced nearly impossible challenges calculating the critical mass of uranium, developing a method of isotope enrichment, and creating a self-sustaining chain reaction. In those years, such concepts bordered on science fiction. Still, the work began strictly classified, funded by the military, and overseen by the Ministry of Armaments. At first, progress seemed promising. Germany possessed a remarkable scientific infrastructure, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin was one of Europe's premier research centers. But when war broke out in 1939, priorities shifted. Many of the best scientists were drafted into the military. Laboratories were destroyed or repurposed for immediate wartime needs. Even so, research did not stop. Heisenberg and his team focused on neutron behavior, the creation of a reactor using heavy water, and methods to enrich uranium-235, the isotope necessary for a nuclear explosion. One of the most decisive questions was the choice of neutron moderator. To sustain a chain reaction, neutrons had to be slowed without being absorbed. The two candidates were graphite and heavy water. Heisenberg chose the latter, believing that German graphite contained too many impurities. That decision became a fatal miscalculation. In the United States, scientists using purified graphite succeeded in building the world's first working nuclear reactor by 1942. In Germany, heavy water was rare and difficult to produce, available only at a single facility in occupied Norway. Meanwhile, the United States and Britain had launched their own effort, the Manhattan Project. Allied intelligence began to gather reports of German nuclear research and realized the danger was real. Covert operations were organized to sabotage Germany's progress. One of the most daring was the 1943 raid on the heavy water plant at Vemork, Norway. Norwegian commandos destroyed critical equipment, and subsequent Allied bombing made recovery impossible. This act set Germany's nuclear project back months, if not years. Yet, even as Europe burned, in hidden laboratories far from the front lines, the work continued. By 1944, experiments were underway beneath the towns of Stuttgart and Haigerloch, where physicists attempted to achieve a self-sustaining chain reaction. Uranium blocks were suspended in a tank filled with heavy water. But the reaction never reached criticality. There was too little uranium, too little moderator, and above all, too little time. The Reich was collapsing. Its resources were vanishing. Heisenberg and Wirtz realized they would never complete their work, but they persisted, driven not only by orders, but by the unrelenting pursuit of scientific discovery. By late 1944, German scientists had accumulated several tons of uranium, some mined in Czechoslovakia and from deposits originally sourced in the Belgian Congo. But raw material was not enough. They needed a method to enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels. Experimental centrifuges, gas diffusion systems, and magnetic separation devices were built, but none reached industrial scale. Despite possessing some of the finest minds in physics, Nazi Germany failed to turn the theory of atomic power into a working weapon. Yet how close they truly came remains debated even today. In the spring of 1945, as Allied forces advanced into Germany, a secret American operation began. Codenamed Alsos and later integrated into Operation Overcast, its mission was to capture German scientists and nuclear facilities before the Soviets could reach them. Heisenberg, Deibner, and several others were eventually detained and taken to England, where they were confined at Farm Hall, a country estate rigged with hidden microphones. There, Allied intelligence listened to every conversation, hoping to learn just how far the German nuclear project had progressed. It was during those weeks that the full truth emerged. They had been close, frighteningly close, but a few critical steps away from success. The story of Nazi Germany's atomic program remains one of the most haunting and mysterious episodes of World War II. It is a story of ambition, intellect, fear, and error. No one could believe how near the world came to witnessing the dawn of the nuclear age, not in Hiroshima, but in Berlin. Deep beneath the earth, among cold uranium blocks and steel tanks of heavy water, an idea was born that could have changed not only the outcome of the war, but the very destiny of humankind. We could not believe how quickly the search for the atom's secret turned into a race that spanned continents and decided the future of civilization. By 1942, while battles raged across Europe and the Pacific, two parallel worlds existed. One was the visible war of tanks, planes, and soldiers. The other was hidden, fought in laboratories, offices, and underground facilities. It was a silent race for the power of the atom. Whoever won would hold the key to ultimate destruction, or ultimate deterrence. In Germany, the scientific elite worked in isolation. Werner Heisenberg, one of the brightest physicists of the century, believed it was still possible to create a reactor that could sustain a chain reaction. He calculated that such a system could serve as both an energy source and the foundation for a bomb. However, his assumptions about critical mass were off by orders of magnitude. Heisenberg thought that tons of uranium would be needed, while, in reality, only a few dozen kilograms of highly enriched uranium were sufficient for a bomb. That misunderstanding, whether due to scientific error or deliberate caution, remains one of history's great enigmas. The German leadership, including the highest ranks of the Wehrmacht, showed inconsistent interest. The project was classified, but it never received the full industrial support that the Manhattan Project enjoyed. Hitler himself viewed theoretical physics with suspicion, calling it Jewish science. Many leading researchers of Jewish descent had already fled Germany years earlier. Albert Einstein, Lise Meitner, and others who might have accelerated progress. The absence of these minds, combined with ideological rigidity, slowed the effort that might have otherwise succeeded. Meanwhile, in the Allied world, the scale of ambition was unprecedented. The Manhattan Project gathered more than 100,000 people, scientists, engineers, and laborers working in secrecy across the United States. Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, and Hanford became the beating heart of atomic research. Resources flowed without limit, driven by the fear that Germany might already be ahead. Reports of German advances in nuclear fission haunted Allied scientists. Every day seemed a race against an unseen adversary who might unleash the unimaginable first. Back in Europe, the situation grew more desperate. The heavy water sabotage in Norway had crippled one of Germany's main hopes for a working reactor. Yet, the scientists persisted, relocating experiments to safer regions deep inside the Reich. Caves, abandoned quarries, and underground chambers were turned into secret laboratories. Equipment was dismantled, transported by rail, and reassembled in hidden facilities. They knew the Allied bombers were closing in. Yet they continued the pursuit of a dream that had long ceased to be purely scientific. The project's central laboratory in Haigerloch became a symbol of that final effort. There, in a vaulted stone cellar beneath a church, Heisenberg's team built what they called B8, an experimental uranium reactor. Blocks of uranium metal, suspended by cables, hung inside a cylindrical container filled with heavy water. Around it, layers of graphite and concrete provided shielding. The scientists monitored neutron flux and measured radiation levels with instruments that looked primitive by modern standards. They believed they were close. One more adjustment, a little more uranium, and the chain reaction might begin. But it never did. Outside those walls, the world was collapsing. The Red Army advanced from the east, while the Western Allies crossed the Rhine. Supplies dwindled. Communication lines broke down. Still, in the quiet of the Haigerloch chamber, the experiment continued. For the physicists, it was not about victory anymore. It was about discovery, about proving that human intellect could harness the invisible forces of nature even as civilization itself was burning. As the war approached its end, Allied intelligence intensified its search. The Alsos mission, led by Colonel Boris Pasch and physicist Samuel Goudsmit, was tasked with following the German armies and seizing nuclear materials, documents, and scientists. They moved swiftly through France, Belgium, and Germany, collecting fragments of evidence. What they found astonished them: half-finished centrifuges, barrels of uranium oxide, blueprints for reactors, and test data showing measurable neutron activity. The Germans were behind, but not hopelessly so. A few more years, uninterrupted, and the balance might have shifted. When Allied troops reached Haigerloch in April 1945, they discovered the experimental reactor still intact. The heavy water tank, the uranium cubes, and the measuring instruments lay in place. The scientists had fled, leaving their work behind. American soldiers dismantled the equipment, packed it into crates, and sent it to the United States for analysis. The uranium blocks were found to be real, the calculations genuine. For the first time, the world saw how close the Nazi nuclear project had come to a breakthrough. The captured scientists were interrogated, not harshly, but persistently. What did they know? How far had they gone? Did they truly understand the bomb's potential? Heisenberg and his colleagues claimed they had focused on reactors, not weapons, that their goal had been to explore energy, not destruction. Yet, intercepted documents and wartime memos suggested otherwise. The line between research and weaponization was thinner than they admitted. At Farm Hall in England, where they were held in secret after their capture, microphones recorded every word they spoke. When news of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima reached them in August 1945, their astonishment was genuine. Heisenberg reportedly tried to recalculate the physics of the explosion on a chalkboard, realizing his earlier errors. For them, it was not only the end of a war, but the collapse of a scientific vision. They had been overtaken by those who had once fled their homeland. Across the world, the atomic age had begun, but it could have begun elsewhere, under a different flag, with unimaginable consequences. The shadow of what might have been still lingers in every discussion of nuclear history. The German project had lacked coordination, resources, and time, but not intellect. The knowledge was there, waiting. The materials existed. The calculations had been written down. What stopped them was not ignorance, but circumstance. A chain of small misjudgments, delays, and rivalries that spared the world from an earlier nuclear dawn. In the ruins of Germany, Allied soldiers found notes scrawled on laboratory paper, equations unfinished, reactor components stacked in corners. To some, it looked like the remains of a failed experiment. To others, it was a glimpse of an alternate future, one where the sky above Europe might have burned first. The war for the atom had been fought in silence, without armies or banners, yet its outcome defined the next century. The world would never be the same. No one could believe how quietly the story ended. There was no explosion, no secret unveiling, only the echo of retreating boots through abandoned laboratories. When the war was over, the truth lay scattered across the ruins. Notes, broken machines, and an unanswered question: how close had they really come? In the summer of 1945, Allied analysts studied the documents captured from Haigerloch, Gotto, and Berlin. The results shocked even seasoned scientists. The Germans had assembled functional experimental reactors, conducted precise neutron measurements, and produced several tons of metallic uranium. Yet they never reached a self-sustaining chain reaction, and their isotope enrichment techniques lagged years behind the Manhattan Project. The war had consumed too many resources, too much time, and too many brilliant minds. Still, their theoretical grasp of nuclear physics was deeper than anyone had imagined. For the Allies, this revelation was both a relief and a warning. Fear of a German atomic bomb had driven the United States to attempt the impossible. Now, realizing that Germany had been close, but not close enough, reshaped the entire view of scientific warfare. The atomic age had begun under American control, but its roots reached back to Berlin's laboratories and to the equations scribbled by men who never finished their work. At Farm Hall, the captured scientists were released into a homeland left in ruins. Some, like Heisenberg, tried to rebuild the nation's scientific institutions. Others withdrew from public life, carrying the weight of what might have been. For them, the purity of discovery had become a moral question. Could knowledge remain innocent once it had shown its power to destroy entire cities? That doubt shadowed them for the rest of their lives. Much of the German nuclear record remained classified for decades. The Allies feared its misuse. The Soviets seized their share of data, equipment, and specialists, folding them into their own atomic program. Laboratories in Leipzig and Vienna were stripped bare, instruments shipped east. The remnants of one dream became the blueprint for another, a divided world locked in nuclear competition. The Nazi atomic project became a ghost, haunting both superpowers. It proved how near humanity had come to destruction, even before Hiroshima. Every post-war reactor and every nuclear test carried, in some sense, the shadow of that earlier race. The failure of the German program did not end the pursuit of the atom's power. It merely decided who would wield it first. By the 1950 seconds, Heisenberg and his colleagues publicly distanced themselves from the bomb. They described their wartime work as purely peaceful research. Yet surviving papers told another story. Some, marked with Wehrmacht seals, discussed explosive potential. Others contained estimates of critical mass. The evidence suggested that at least a few within the project understood the weapon they were approaching, even if they denied it later. Historians have long debated their true intentions. Were they quietly sabotaging their own progress, or simply constrained by circumstance and misjudgment? No definitive answer exists. Some see moral restraint, others, fatal miscalculation. But their ambition is undeniable. They sought to control forces that could never truly be contained, forces that would forever alter the relationship between science and survival. Decades later, the ruins of Haigerloch and the notebooks of the Uranium Club became relics of a path not taken. Visitors now walk through the restored cavern where the first German reactor once stood, unaware that in that dim, cold space, history might have turned another way. The small gray uranium cubes displayed behind glass look ordinary, yet each represents a fragment of a story that could have changed the fate of the world. Allied scientists later admitted how narrow the margin had been. Had the Germans purified their graphite, had the war lasted even one more year, the bomb might have been within reach. A nuclear flash over Europe could have rewritten history entirely. The world was spared by circumstance as much as by human choice. In the end, the German atomic dream became a paradox, a failure that saved millions, an achievement that never fully materialized. The scientists who sought to understand the atom lived long enough to see others weaponize it. Their names endured in textbooks, their equations in laboratories. But the moral burden of their pursuit never disappeared. Today, as nations still guard their nuclear arsenals, the lesson remains. Knowledge, once found, cannot be erased. Power, once pursued, cannot easily be restrained. The German attempt to build an atomic bomb stands as both a warning and a reflection that even the brightest minds, driven by ambition or fear, can bring the world to the edge of irreversible change. No one could believe how close it came, how the war for the atom almost reshaped the planet before it truly began. Hidden in bunkers and laboratories lay the key to humanity's most dangerous weapon. The door to that future stood half open in 1945, and history, by chance more than wisdom, chose to close it